Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Clean Energy Edge. I'm your host, Russ Bates, and joined with me, as always, Mr. Brian Scott in Canada. Brian, how's it going?
Excellent. Russ, how you doing today?
Oh, just another day in America. We love it. Um, we got a pretty cool topic, I think. Let's jump into it. I know we're both excited about it. So this episode, let's talk about that. Let's say it's that one big persistent lie. It's that claim that clean energy only survives because of government subsidies. But when you really dig into the numbers, I mean, the truth is quite the opposite. From what we're seeing, and I think everybody knows that really cares to look at the real numbers, fossil fuels are the one that have been heavily subsidized for more than a century. So let's break this down. Let's do it in about, let's say, three segments. Let's look at the multi-billion dollars in fossil fuel subsidies and why the clean energy would dominate even more if there was just a plain level playing field. Let's also talk about the political effort to roll back clean energy progress. We're seeing that here in the U.S., and they want to roll that back not because it's failing, I would say actually because it's working too well. And number three, why the economics are already favoring clean energy. And the only thing propping up fossil fuels now is, I would say, politics and misinformation. So let's kick this off. Brian, just whenever we're talking about subsidies, and this is primarily here in the U.S., I want to get your take, but I see it all the time on our posts, the things that folks are saying that really don't understand. They'll say, yeah, in the solar subsidies, they can't survive solar, wind, batteries, EVs, you name it, without these subsidies. I mean, but that's really not the truth. People hear about it a lot, but I mean, fossil fuels have been getting subsidies, at least here in the U.S., for over 100 years and still get a lot of subsidies to this day. So what's your take on what you see in Canada there? And also, how do you view what we're going through here in the United States regarding subsidies?
I think it's almost like it just kind of starts with a baseline of a colossal misunderstanding of subsidies in general. I think they exist in almost every industry that really matters to countries. Yep. And you see them get put into place to to maybe help an industry or to balance an industry, or for whatever reason, the government feels that it's necessary for the public, right? It's good for the sake of the country. It was a big reason that got things going at a certain time with solar and EVs and this and that, and probably still so with EVs, right? It still has a major part there. But this has always been a part of oil and gas, and it's structured in a very clever way. And it's given the impression to a lot of people that I always get the pushback, well, that's not a subsidy. It actually, like 100% is defined as a subsidy. But regardless of what it is, whatever you want to call it, it's very simple. There's basically tax credits, like typical capital expenditures. We would be able to write those off over a series of years, right? That's typical business. But on both sides of our border, there's different mechanisms to allow a lot of those capital expenditures to be written off 100% in the first year. And then you take that next step with flow-through shares that allow people to invest in fossil fuel companies and take that tax credit directly through. That tax credit flows through the share, which makes it an extremely appealing investment, right? If you own a large company, you're going to pay a lot of taxes this year. You invest in an oil company that literally wipes out or reduces your tax burden, plus you get a share. I mean, the win is obvious there. It's a short-term gain. It's a very large incentive, and we don't have that in clean energy. We have other things, and you kind of tend to see this thing from both sides of the aisle, if you want to call it that, of we don't get what you get. You know what I mean? It's not a fair playing field. We don't get what you get. When it's a little bit more like this all exists everywhere. I wouldn't say clean energy gets anywhere near the benefits that they do, right? If we could apply some of their rules, I would love it. But it's just this big misunderstanding for most of the public, I think. There's hundreds of billions of dollars going into fossil fuels from subsidies from governments. It's very hard.
Yeah. I think the number I see in direct subsidies to fossil fuels in the U.S. is in that $20 billion a year range. but that's just direct dollars. That doesn't count for several other things. A number I do see is like $750 billion when you look at things like the pollution, the healthcare costs, throw in the environmental and climate impacts. That's according to the International Monetary Fund. Now, that's one thing. Those are numbers that everybody could slice and dice in different ways. My thought is whenever someone says, solar or wind or whatever, they can't survive. They don't compete economically whenever you're talking about the subsidies. And you take those away, they wouldn't survive. Well, I disagree. It would be tougher to compete, but my answer is continuous of, well, let's take those away and let's take the fossil fuel subsidies away. Let's get rid of all of them. And then let's see what happens, because that's in my mind, true level playing field that you can then see. And it wouldn't be a contest at all. It would be very easy to see clean energy for a lot of reasons. But if you're just looking at economics, it makes the most sense for moving forward. So that's what I look at a lot.
Clean energy has always been the lowest risk, right? And as prices come down, it's made more and more sense because you invest in it and you have such little maintenance costs, right? You invest in it, it's ready to go. It does what you need it to do, where there's no fuel stock, right? Whether if it's natural gas, you're trying to generate energy, coal, whatever it may be, you have to keep feeding that, and you don't know what the price of that is going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now. It's an open market. Sure, you see a lot of companies that play both sides of that, right? Maybe they have investments on the natural gas side, and they own a generator. That makes a lot of sense, but it's one of those things that there's volatility there, and it's not a clean investment that way.
No, I mean, whenever you're looking at fossil fuel power gen, whether it's a coal plant, natural gas, I guess they're still accelerating a bit when you're talking about innovation and the technology. But I mean, how much more can they squeeze out of that to make it more cost effective? I don't know. I mean, it appears to me probably not much. This is a lot of the same technology with some advances that's come about over the years. Meanwhile, clean energy continues to advance, and it's going to come to a stop, I'm guessing, at some point with efficiency of solar cells, with battery storage and what can be done there. But we're not there yet, and there's still a lot of benefits just to going with clean energy when you're talking about schedule. Whenever you're talking about just the ease of deployment, obviously you have interconnection, you have all those other things, but still, I mean, you can get this stuff online much faster and much cheaper.
100%. I think there's very little doubt on that these days. We definitely saw regulations in our areas that kind of delayed the development of a lot of renewables going on grid at a utility scale for there was like an 18-month period where it was like a pause. And they essentially did a bunch of studies that told us things that we already knew. While a lot of other, fossil assets completed, got on the grid, and reduced the demand for investors that wanted to invest in these clean energy projects. You saw a lot of them fall off and not get completed, and the value of them decrease for sure. It exists on both sides, and it's just it's like a lot of things, right? If the public understood it more, I think they would be interested in it more. I think even the residential, because we're involved in residential solar, even the practice of residential sales, because there are predatory solar salesmen like most industries, that can leave a bad taste in people's mouths, and they associate maybe a very expensive quote they got for their home with what it costs to put something on the grid, and there's no correlation there. It's just maybe a slimy salesperson or slimy company charging double the price. So now it's like, well, this is what solar costs, right? And there's no factor of economics of scale. There's no factor of just, was that a competitive quote? The amount of people I talk to, they're like, well, no, it was, I got a quote, it was way too expensive. Like, did you get more than one quote? Well, no. Well, what was the quote? They tell you, and you're like, oh, that's an insane price, right? Like,
yeah. and it translates. I mean, that's a problem we see here in the States too. You have the predatory types, mostly in residential, not so much in CNI or the utility scale, but you have those predatory type. You have some that this is a new sector, so you have some companies that'll come in, and maybe it started by an electrician who can really do great work out in the field, but then has a struggle on the business side, right? And they go out of business. They just don't know how to do the business part and the cash flow and all that type of thing. But wow, can they install a system that's top notch? So you'll have those issues too, because it's a young sector, right? Still, those things all add up into a message that can be, hey, clean energy is not the way to go because they're slimy, or because they go out of business, or because I got a quote that shows my house, I'll never get an ROI for 50 years or something silly. Yeah, somebody made a comment that on one of my posts saying, if you're 60 years old, you probably better go a different route because you'll never see the ROI. I'm like, well, I mean, are they planning on dying pretty quick? Because, it depends. Yeah. So those types of things are always something to consider. I think that's an excellent point, that a bad comment, the negatives, those travel a lot faster than, the positive comments, right?
We see it on social media, right? We put out a lot of content. I know you do. And a powerful statement without a basis of argument can be enough for it to spread like wildfire. The belief of cloud seeding, of anything, right? I'll get people telling me that, I try and have that conversation with where they're like, well, I got a quote and it was insanely expensive. And it was, it was like 8-10 years ago. And I'm like, okay, well, it probably was expensive. It was 8-10 years ago. And they're like, well, what's really changed? And I'm like, well, the price significantly. Like It's like I always use this, and I can't use it with everybody because nobody gets the reference. But it's like comparing shale oil in the States before fracking and saying that it's really shale oil is really expensive to drill. Yeah. Well, it was, and now it's not. But now there's less value there, so they're not drilling it as much, right? Like it needs a higher price still, but it wouldn't have been drilled in, like, the amount of development without fracking in the U.S. and Canada would have been very different. And it's the same thing with solar.
That's a great example. I throw out every once in a while when people are having a hard time understanding how the price could come down on this technology. I point them to, well, think of a big screen TV in the 1990s or 2000s compared to now. I mean, you were paying thousands of dollars for a big screen. Now you can get one that's way better and way bigger for a couple hundred, $200, $300.
The last time I was out looking at TVs, I had that kind of couple-minute process of seeing all these TVs and being like, what's wrong with these? And then you kind of put it together, you see enough of them, you're like, this is just what this costs now. Okay, that'd be nice if other things outside of technology work that way, but it's technology, right? It's like solar panels, anything that's technology, it has that, what do they call it, Moore's Law or whatever? It has that the price keeps dropping until a certain point. I don't see much change going forward with solar cost, especially equipment. I think you could even see a point where it's starting to creep back up a little bit. I don't think the cells are going to change efficiency fast enough. And I could be wrong. There could be, they talk about perovskite and all these things that have their negatives. Maybe I'll be wrong. But I think it's the batteries that are going through the big evolutionary change that we saw 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago with solar. And that changes everything. Because if batteries hit that point where they're cheap enough, it incentivizes solar, right? It makes solar even more appealing.
It does. You're going to see a lot more people, I think, to that point, Brian, of maybe looking more at islanding and not having to rely on the grid nearly as much, 100%. Right? So that makes a lot of sense. And that's probably a good segue to get into what's going on, at least here in the States, with regard to legislation. So the big, beautiful bill that they're talking about, which to me, that's code for, all right, how are we going to get screwed over? And it's obvious, right? They're wanting to do some stuff for tax credits, to extend those, but they've got to find a way to pay for that. And one way they're looking to pay for it, you've heard of, Medicaid's in the news and all these kind of things. Yep. And it's, like we were talking off air before, it's very dynamic because some part of this bill was dead on Friday night. And it something passed. They talked some folks into it or threatened them or whatever on Sunday evening. And, here we are Monday afternoon and they've got something through. Who knows what it's going to be, but part of having to pay for this is rolling back a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the clean energy tax credits, right? So, we've talked about EV charging, the NEVI program. I'm sure that's gone. Whenever I was in DC a few months ago, that was evident. The $7,500 tax credit for buying an EV, I'm sure that's out. But that's pennies compared to what they need. And the investment tax credit, the production tax credit, those are the dollars they're wanting to get. That's bigger money. And the problem that they're facing is that's in a lot of red states where they're seeing a lot of that economic development and the ROI attached to that. So I don't know what's going to happen there. I could give a prediction, but what's your thought?
I think it's difficult anywhere to be a successful politician if the economy isn't good, right? Like almost anything you do will be second guessed or whatever. I think Trump's approach, or what some people liked about Trump, was they felt the economy was better when he was in power, and that would happen again. It doesn't feel like it's happening, and to most people, it feels like prices are about to go up. Yeah. We're seeing some prices come up on this side of the board. I don't know if you're seeing much of it, but cutting all of these programs that have so much economic activity attached to them, and private investment and all these sorts of things, that is not, in my view, going to be popular, right? You're talking about an economy that we could be 6 months away from talking about stimulus, right? Like maybe I'm paranoid, but it could be that way, right? It very much could be that way. Well, if prices all go up, the economy is going to go.
Yeah, that's part of what people, I don't think, realize. You made an excellent point that the reason Trump got a lot of votes was because people voted with their pocketbook, right? It's about the economy, stupid. And, not the economy was terrible. So there was inflation for sure. But you got to look, this was because of a global pandemic. Was the economy better when Trump was in? Yeah. I would say it was, because there was no pandemic and the recovery effort after. I'm not saying the previous administration did everything perfectly. I've got a lot of issues with a lot of things they did there, but the economy was doing all right. To your point, that's what they're rolling with, and we're seeing price increase. I'm seeing it. I haven't seen eggs less than 5 something a dozen, but I won't blame that all on Trump. That's bird flu. That's some other things. But there's certain things that are not equating, and people aren't realizing of why the economy was in a little bit of trouble, in 21, 22, 23, and into 24 too.
Yeah, it's. Trump definitely has that, right? Like it doesn't matter what a president does or what a politician does. So much emotion gets attached to what the economic feel was at that time. And he came in a great time, right? Like when Obama came into power, it was doom and gloom. It was as bad as it gets. When he left power, it really wasn't bad, right?
Right.
I think if the candidate wasn't Hillary, it might have been another Democrat, right?
I agree.
But Trump was a phenom. Like you can't kind of understate how different and unique he has been politically. Like he's changed the world for the better or worse is the debate. But
yeah, that's a whole other pod.
Yeah, people felt really good about it. I know a lot of Americans that told me, "Oh, he was great for the economy." And I, as somebody who really likes to dial in on policy, I couldn't really say what he did that helped. He was big on deregulation, which all Republicans always are. With good and bad impacts to that, in my opinion. But it's a hard thing to come into power claiming you're going to solve inflation, you're going to make the economy better, and then you put in these tariffs that are inevitably going to raise costs, right? And then it's like, okay, we solved inflation, it's been going down every month, let's put something in that ramps it right back up. I
Yeah.
don't know how that's going to age. It's not going to age well in my view. I'm very curious for the year from now, right? Because it's the honeymoon still, and it's been so much drama. And he's working that news cycle every other day. It feels like just throw some more red meat out there, good or bad, change what people are talking about. But a year from now, when we're talking about the midterms, what are people going to be saying? What's the economy going to be like? If his predictions are correct and the economy is just humming, I will be impressed. And in all honesty, if that happens, there will probably be another Republican president after him.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's true. And I guess with the IRA, and like I don't know what came through last night, but my understanding, what they were trying to get through on Friday night, it showed that the tax incentives would be phased out. I think they were going to stay pretty much the same percentages, but then like the end of 2029 or maybe 2030, it would be over, right? So it would cut it. It basically killed a few years earlier. And I was like, well, okay, that's not great, but at least it's kind of staying in there. I'm also hearing that part of that was residential would totally go away. They wouldn't have tax incentives for any residential projects. So you're talking CNI, and utility scale. I'm like, well, I don't work in residential, but that's a real kick below the belt, right?
For sure.
And then I heard a little bit more that to even qualify for these incentives, you couldn't get any panels. You couldn't get anything from like China or any parts of Southeast Asia. So really, everything really originates from there, whether it's your cells, whether it's the full panel, whether it's the BESS, what have you. I'm like, well, actually, that could kill everything, or really, put Mike Tyson beating on it. So Mike Tyson
like
from
that.
the mid 80s, right?
Yeah.
Not from now. But yeah, I mean, that's the other fear is, are people really reading what's in that? If they're seeing, okay, it still stays till here, but then in the fine print, it really kills everything. I mean, there's, I think my notes say there's 130,000. I mean, the numbers change, 130, 250, however many thousands of jobs are out there because of clean energy. Those would all go away.
Our newly elected prime minister is a famous former economist of sorts, and one of the things he's talked about is splitting the budget into two, as far as government costs and investments, and kind of stating anything that's an investment is something that gains value over time. Let's say. Or it doesn't cost the government, like it's maybe a cost reducer over time, that sort of thing, which I think is an insanely how would I say this, clever politically, but also it's just good for, I think, people to understand that governments need to make investments in infrastructure, because if you don't invest in infrastructure, it costs you more money in the end. You know what I mean? Whether it doesn't allow a city to develop or it causes damage, whatever it may be, right? Like, a Newark airport that can't land planes, probably very costly to the economy in that area, right? That whole air traffic control thing going on right now.
Oh my God, yeah.
Right, like that's costly to the economy. There's no doubt about it. They're not allowing planes to land as fast as they want to, and it feels like the pilots are half guessing when they do. But it's whether that's been used politically cleverly or not. I think it would be so good for the public to be able to differentiate what their government is spending that could be justified as an investment or not, right? And I know that's always going to become a political debate because each side can say, "Oh, this is an investment," but it's parsing that apart. And these budgets are so complicated, and they need to be simplified for the average user's eyes, I think. But when you're investing in things to make your country or a region more efficient over time, and being able to, it's not even investing in education, right? Like if you're going to get smarter, more educated people that are going to produce more, that are going to be better earners, that are like all these sorts of things. I think it's different. And I think if you just start cutting the wrong things so you can give rich people tax breaks, I don't think that ages well. And I don't think it works out. I think, I'm a bit of a Dalio acolyte, but like you got to pay the bills and you can't let your people starve.
Yeah, I'm thinking this through because I like what you're saying. I think that makes a lot of sense for people to be able to understand. Like you hear the word entitlements, right?
Yeah.
And you're just giving out my taxpayer dollars to pay for this over there. Like Medicaid, you pay into that. Social Security, you pay into that. Those are both called entitlements. The last I looked, because you're entitled to them because you paid in.
You earn them.
You've earned them. Yeah, you've totally earned those. I'm not saying they don't need to have some reform and maybe not. I wouldn't say doge it, but everything could probably get a little bit better. I believe in continuous improvement. But with that said, you're right. If there's a better way to look at things, all right. Here's what we need to keep the lights on, right, so to speak. And here's what we need to invest in our retirement, or if you kind of put it like a household budget, I mean, I think people could relate to that a lot better. But the other thing is maybe they don't want it to be very simple.
Sure, I agree with that. It's one of those things with Trump. Like, there's some things that he says that I kind of agree with, but maybe it's the delivery or the approach. You know what I mean? Like, he used to talk about, he even talked about in this campaign, lowering the U.S. military budget, right? Maybe they could, maybe if we can work a deal with China and Russia, everybody lowers their military budget. And in all honesty, I think that is like the right answer. And it's not my opinion. I don't get a vote here, but that could be, if it could be done correctly, safely, the U.S. is kind of our big brother to the south that we feel like protects us. There's no doubt about that. But Trump's point, I think, is correct that too much American money gets spent protecting the world. I'm totally good with like USAID, but like militarily, when I don't know if you've ever read any books about some of the money that gets wasted about the U.S. military. Like it's
oh my God, yeah,
it's astronomical, right? If there was a place to cut money that is not, in my view, an investment, well, I'm sure it'll be viewed as an investment in what do we want to call this? The homeland, defense, safety,
homeland
all
security,
that sort of stuff.
All that, sure.
If you want to qualify that to money that's been spent that saved lives, there's a lot of other categories you can save lives just with healthcare or anything else, right? Like,
yeah,
it's a complicated issue. It really is, and getting consensus across both sides of the aisle will be difficult. And it's obviously very politicized because there's a lot of like companies tied into the Pentagon and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But there's money there. There's a lot of money there that could actually be cut, and people wouldn't die the next day, right? Like,
yeah. There's so much room for improvement. You make another spot on point that a lot of what politicians, Trump or whoever, says there's some base ideas that are great. I think most people would agree with, but you get into the execution, and does it really turn out to be what they're talking about? I'll say Doge, right? That was okay. That sounds good. Let's get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. All right, fantastic. Yeah. They didn't get anything. They caused a lot of upheaval. I think the 150 or 160 billion they saved, which, by the way, originally it was going to be 2 trillion, right?
Close,
they cut that down to 1. Yeah, they had to cut that in half, and then it's like 15% of that. So, which 7% of the 2 trillion or whatever.
Yeah.
That doesn't even look like it's legit. It's probably closer to 60 or 70 billion, and that's great. They saved that. Yeah. But I mean, what did they really cut? Was that juice worth the squeeze, as I like to say? I wouldn't have touched that piece of fruit because it just didn't make sense and just reckless and everything. And you got Elon, but
so fast, right? Like, cuts that happen that fast are generally very poorly evaluated, I think.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of getting things done fast. I love that.
Sure.
but you have to do it in the right way. I'm very impatient, but I know things take time. Is something I'll say.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
and this one takes a lot more time. But let let's get into our last point here,
Okay.
and that's about clean energy. I mean, it's already winning on the merits. So even without the tax credits, and I'm saying tax credits across the board, clean energy is cheaper than fossil fuel. It's definitely cheaper than nuclear, right? Nuclear, I've got a lot of cons. I'll say with negative with regards to nuclear.
Yep.
They've got some marks in the plus column or in the pro column
100%.
too.
100%.
But when you're looking at no fuel costs, the predictable pricing, the scalability, the deployment, I think it makes so much sense. And a lot of these utilities and these investors, they're not choosing clean energy because of some ideology. They're following the numbers, right? They're going with the economics. So, to me, if we could get rid of all the subsidies for the energy sector, cool. Prices would go up for fossil fuels. Prices would go up for clean energy. But clean energy would undoubtedly be the lower cost. That's the way I've been looking at the numbers. What's your thoughts?
I think if you look at the structure of most of these oil and gas companies, the way the subsidies impact them, I think they'd have cash flow issues and devaluation issues, because most of the incentives they fundamentally get are about people just buying shares, and the shares fund the operations, right? And then they get their money back through the flow through. You take that away, there's going to be a lot of institutional investors that are like, okay, the math just changed. And there might be people running for the exit that own some of these massive companies, right? You see all the fundamentals change. You're like, hey, well, wait a minute. I don't want to be part of this. This might be worth 20% less tomorrow, or 50, like who knows, right? And it won't have all these financial advantages. So I think a lot of companies, oil and gas companies, large ones, would shrink. You might see some mergers. You might see all sorts of things like that, because anybody in business knows it's cash flow is it's everything, right? If you have lots of cash flow, you can do anything. You can solve any problem. But if you're an oil and gas company and suddenly your cash flow is very different, you're shrinking. It's just the way it's going to go.
Yeah, like the levelized cost of energy, levelized cost of electricity, whichever way you want to frame it. Let's see, I got some notes here. It like for gas, it varies, right? They've got a pretty big range here: $39 to $101 a megawatt hour. Coal, 68 to 166 a megawatt hour. Now you compare that with wind and solar. They're looking at $24 to $60 a megawatt hour. So, it's going to vary depending on where you're at and the size project. Obviously, that's going to the bigger the project, the lower the cost.
Sure.
But you just take the subsidies out. It's a totally different ball game. And
100%.
it's funny to me that it's always the folks saying that solar or wind or storage can't make it without subsidies, when they just don't have a clue of what the fossil fuel industry has been receiving, not just for a few years, over 100 years here in the U.S.
Right. Yeah,
So,
it's one of those things that I think everybody kind of needs to come to terms with, that these subsidies exist across all industries, and administrations of any government have the ability to, put their finger on any one of these levers and really impact it. I think there will be areas in the U.S. if all these programs lose their funding. You think of areas like California that are like half the size solar installation field that it was just a few years ago, right? Just regulatory changes that, in all honesty, I think make a lot of sense. A lot of people I know in solar would disagree with me, but you can't. Once you hit a certain point, you need to start getting more battery support, stuff like that. You need to put in policies that influence that. I think that's kind of the mature approach. But areas like that will take a beating from something like this, I think. When you're a weakened area, there's probably a lot of companies that are just barely getting by, and now I saw an article just the other day, somebody getting interviewed in the solar industry, and they were, we sold, I want to say they said they sold 600 systems in the first quarter of this year. And then the first month in, which should be April, they sold one system in April. The drop off was so dramatic, and they are so fearful, of course, because you can't, a company can't shrink that fast, right? Like, it just does not work. Cash flow will disappear.
Wow. That's scary. Was that in Canada or?
No, that was, I want to say it was in San Diego area, to be honest.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I could see that. I could see that, unfortunately, with just the uncertainty. It's hard to plan when you don't have a clue of what the economics are going to be. And that's where we're at today. And I could see us being here for a while, depending on what happens in DC. Yeah. But they have so much power with that, right? Like in Canada, the Greener Homes loan has been of some debate. Was of some debate in the election, and it's that basically the government's financing a solar installation for your home 0% for 10 years. That's hugely popular, right? But at the same time, if it goes away, the industry would, without a doubt, shrink overnight. Right. It's too incentivized. It's too easy for people. People don't want to pay out of pocket. 0% interest is so appealing. It's a why not for a lot of people. But the other candidate was going to remove it. We looked at the cost of it, what the government carrying that interest for that period of time of the program, and then we divided it by citizens. It equated to about $4.50 per citizen, the cost of the program. Right. So it's very little. Because it's not like the government's not giving money away; they're lending it cheaper than they get it, right? Yeah. That I would look at that as one of those investments into the country, because the more energy independence, the more this and that you can do to benefit everybody. I mean, dude, that's pretty damn good.
It feels like a no-brainer to me, and it spreads to things like insulation windows, things like that that can fit into that package. But it is mostly solar that you see.
So if they were putting it in the bank, for every citizen they'd be losing $4 and some change over a decade.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. I mean, that does seem like a no-brainer. So
it does, but. It's one of those things. If you're cutting, you're going to cut what doesn't suit your narrative, and it didn't suit the conservative narrative. Luckily, that election went the way I was hoping it would, but we don't. If you win one, you probably lose the next one. That's how it goes.
Well, no. I'm sure your mindset is let's help as many people with this while it's in place as possible.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
No, that's good. Well, I would say. My thought is the bottom line on this is, you remove subsidies and the market distortions and all this kind of stuff. I mean, clean energy, it still dominates. It's just going to be how much does it dominate by. So, well, let's call that good for this episode of the Clean Energy Edge. Brian, thanks so much. And for all our listeners, follow us on Spotify, on Apple Podcast, on Amazon Music. iHeartRadio. I mean, we're all over the place.
Everywhere you can.
Catch us later. Thanks.